Hello again. Tonight, I tell you the story of a woman whose tattoo artist ex came back after 2 years, showing up at her door, asking to finish the design she had started on her ribs. For spicier, uncensored versions of these stories, check my Patreon in the description below. Now, let's begin.
The knock came 3 times, not the urgent hammering of emergencies, and not the casual tap of a neighbor borrowing something. 3 deliberate, measured knocks, with enough space between each one to tell me the person on the other side had been standing in that hallway for a full minute deciding whether to do it. I looked through the peephole and my stomach remembered things my brain had spent 2 years carefully trying to forget. Cora Hale was standing in my hallway holding her heels. Just there, in bare feet on the beige hallway carpet, her dark hair loose against her shoulders, mascara slightly wrecked, heels loose in her hand like she had given up on them somewhere between whatever bar she had come from and my door. She was looking at it the way a person looks at something that might not open for them. I stood there for 30 seconds. Then I let her in. Before we continue, comment below where in the world you are watching from, and please click like and subscribe for more GL stories. She came inside and I closed the door behind her, and in the warm apartment light I got the full picture of her. The ghost stains on her forearms she could never fully scrub away no matter how hard she tried with that particular citrus soap of hers. 100 sessions of work layered over years and blurred into a faint watercolor impression on her skin. Her dark hair loose, her heels set down by the door. She smelled like whiskey and the cold outside, and something underneath both of those things that I was not going to name at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. I had not seen Cora in 14 months. 14 months of rebuilding my apartment without her in it. 14 months of her being technically back in this city and not reaching out, and me being technically in this city and also not reaching out. Both of us maintaining that particular adult equilibrium where you choose different coffee shops on purpose and trust the world to cooperate. The world had apparently decided it was done cooperating. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I said back. I was unreasonably proud of how level that came out. She shifted her weight from one bare foot to the other on the hallway carpet, that awful industrial beige every apartment building in this price range apparently orders from the same cheerless catalog. "I was at Callaway's," she said. Callaway's was a bar 4 blocks east, the kind of place where you could sit alone for 3 hours and nobody would feel sorry for you. Cora had always liked it for that reason. I had a few drinks. "I can tell," I said. Not unkindly. She wasn't sloppy drunk. She was the other kind. The kind where the filters come down not because the person has lost control, but because they have decided the effort of maintaining them is no longer worth what it costs. "I kept thinking about your ribs," she said. The sentence dropped into my chest like a stone into still water. She closed her eyes briefly and opened them. "The tattoo. I kept thinking about the tattoo. I was going through old portfolio files tonight and I found the reference sketches, and I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that it's still unfinished, that it's been almost 2 years. A pause. That's mine to fix. The left side of my ribcage chose that moment to register itself. Not pain. Something more like a cellular memory of the last time anyone had been genuinely close to that particular stretch of skin. You're a little drunk, and it's 11:30, I said. Both true, she agreed. She didn't move. She had always had exceptional stillness when it mattered. I'm also serious. I looked at her for 3 more seconds than was strictly necessary. Then I opened the door wider. Come in, I said. But I'm finishing my pasta first. She had always taken up exactly the right amount of space in a room. Not domineering, not self-effacing, just fully present in a way I had noticed the very first time I saw her, at a street art event Danny had dragged me to almost 3 years ago. She had been standing by a rack of flash prints with a cup of cheap wine, talking to someone I didn't know, and she was not performing at all. The complete absence of effort. The quality of a person who doesn't need the room to validate her, so the room quietly orients toward her anyway. I stared too long. She noticed. She looked directly at me with a slight, assessing tilt of her head, and then looked away, and I spent the rest of that evening manufacturing excuses to drift toward the same corner of the room. We ended up talking by the drinks table at the end of the night. She mentioned she was a tattoo artist. I mentioned I had been thinking about a piece for a while, something botanical for my ribs, but hadn't found the right artist. She handed me her card without ceremony, the way someone hands over a practical object rather than bait. I was immediately charmed by the absence of salesmanship. Her card sat on my windowsill for 2 weeks. I called on a Sunday morning and got her voicemail. I left a message with more detail than warranted because I was nervous. She called back that afternoon. We talked for 45 minutes. I booked a consultation. 7 months later, she had put flowers under my skin, and I was falling in love with her by the specific, irreversible method of spending extended time with someone whose intelligence you cannot stop admiring. Now she was sitting at my kitchen table while I reheated leftover pasta, and neither of us was filling the silence with small talk, and the apartment felt different with her in it. Fuller, denser, as if the air had weight it hadn't carried in over a year. "You changed things," she said, looking at the gallery wall above the sofa. "Some of it, last spring." She studied the arrangement with the focused, assessing attention she gave to anything visual. Not a flattering look, precisely, because it was the same look she gave strangers tattoos, and well-composed menus, and good afternoon light hitting a window. It was just how her brain processed the world. Everything got evaluated. I had once loved this about her, and occasionally been maddened by it in equal measure. "That print in the center is new," she said. "Flea market." I sat across from her with my bowl, and she watched me eat for a moment and then looked at the table. "I've been back for 3 months," she said. I knew. Danny had told me with the careful neutrality she deployed when giving information she thought I might not want, but believed I needed. "I know," I said. Cora looked up. "You didn't reach out." "Neither did you." She absorbed this quietly, without argument or deflection, which had always been both the most admirable and most maddening thing about her. She just held the uncomfortable truth and let it be uncomfortable without performing distress about it. "No," she said. "I didn't." She picked at the edge of the table, a small restless habit I recognized from 100 other evenings. Her hands had always needed something to do. "I thought about it every week for 3 months. But instead you had a few drinks at Calloway's and walked here." Something flickered at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. I had a version of the text drafted 5 separate times. Then I had 2 more drinks and decided this was simpler. I think that tells you something about how the texting was going. It did. It told me the text felt too calculated and the showing up felt too reckless. And she had chosen reckless, which was not usually Cora, which meant something had shifted in her I couldn't fully read yet. "The tattoo," I said, steering us back toward firmer ground. She nodded. "The tattoo." It had started on a cold Saturday in late January. We had been together 7 months by then, and she had been working on the design for weeks, filling pages of her worn sketchbook with botanical studies. When she finally spread the full piece out on her work table and stepped back, I stood looking at it without speaking for a long moment. It was wildflowers. Technically a mix of species she had invented rather than faithfully reproduced, which she told me later was deliberate because the real ones never had quite the shapes she needed. Something with petals that curved back as if bracing against wind. Something with a long, winding stem that threaded between the other forms as though searching for somewhere to belong. At the bottom of the composition, she had drawn the roots visible. I asked her why she wanted to put it on my ribs specifically. She gave me that quiet, measuring look she used when deciding how honest to be. Then she said, "Because people put things on their ribs when they're not showing them to everyone." I said yes before she finished the sentence. The first session was 3 hours. She angled the client chair so the light from her studio's north window fell exactly right, set up her equipment with methodical care, and then she lifted my shirt and I stared at the studio ceiling while she pressed the stencil to the skin along my left ribs. The very first thing I thought, before she had even begun, was that her hands were the steadiest thing I had ever felt. She did the outline in that single session, the stems, the petals, the roots, the entire architecture of the piece in clean dark lines against my skin. She photographed the fresh work and walked me through aftercare, and she was completely professional throughout, except that when I pulled my shirt back down, she kept her hand briefly on my shoulder and said, quietly, that she was glad we were doing this. I understood she meant more than the tattoo. The shading session was scheduled 6 weeks out, when she would build in the depth and dimension that would make the piece look alive. She had shown me the reference sketches. It was going to be extraordinary. She canceled 2 days before. A rescheduling text I didn't read into. She canceled the next appointment too. That one I noticed. 3 months after that, she told me about Portland. The artist she had been offered a residency with was named Ellis Tanaka, and he was apparently one of the most significant working artists in botanical fine line tattooing in the country. The opportunity was genuine. The honor was real. I understood all of this. What I could not understand was why she had known for 6 weeks before telling me. I found out on a Sunday afternoon. I was sitting on her kitchen counter eating cereal out of the box the way I did when I was anxious in her space, and she came and stood against the opposite counter and told me she had been offered an 8-month residency in Portland and that she had already accepted. "You already accepted," I repeated. "3 weeks ago," she said. She didn't look away. She never looked away from hard things, which I normally respected, and which in that moment felt intolerable. "I was afraid of what you'd say." "So you decided what I'd say on my behalf?" I said. "Wren." "I follow the logic," I said. I set the cereal box down very carefully. "You thought I'd try to talk you out of it or that I'd be hurt, and you'd have to manage that. So you made the decision without including me at all." The silence after that had texture. "I was going to tell you sooner," she said, "every week. But you didn't. But I didn't." There was more to the fight after that. Things said precisely and things said badly, and a moment where I asked if this was how she made most of her significant decisions. And she said yes, actually, many of them. And I asked her to leave. And she did. Quietly, without dramatics. The same composed acceptance she brought to most difficult things, which somehow made it worse. She left for Portland 6 weeks later. The unfinished tattoo healed fully over those months. The outline clean and permanent in my skin, the rest of it absent. I thought about finishing it with another artist for exactly 1 week before dismissing the idea completely. It was hers. Unfinished was what it was. I had decided, in the way you decide things you need to believe in order to keep moving, that incomplete was its own kind of complete. I said this to Danny once. I'm not certain I believed it then. "How long are you back for?" I asked. We had moved from the kitchen table to the living room, not by any conscious decision, but as the natural consequence of the kitchen table feeling too small and too exposed for whatever this conversation was becoming. She was at the far end of the sofa. I was in the armchair. A sensible amount of furniture between us. "Permanently, I think," she said. "I signed a new studio lease last month. I'm reopening in the spring." "Here, you're staying here." I missed home. She picked up the throw pillow beside her and held it in her lap, her hands again. "I missed." She stopped. "The residency was good?" I said. The residency was the best 8 months of my working life. She looked at the coffee table. Ellis is a genuinely singular artist. I came back a different kind of craftsman. A pause. And then I came back and I stood outside your building one night in December and stood there for about 20 minutes and then went home. I stared at her. I'm not telling you that to be dramatic, she said. I'm telling you because you deserve to know I thought about this, that staying away cost something. I sat with that for a moment. I generally have things to say in silences. I'm known among my people for having things to say. The capacity for functional sentences was apparently a casualty of Cora Hale sitting on my sofa on a Tuesday night, telling me she had stood outside my building in December. Why are you telling me now? I managed. Because I'm a little drunk, she said, with the ghost of something tired and fond under it. And because I've been back 3 months looking at unfinished work and I can't keep doing it. There it was again. That word. Unfinished. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Danny. Danny. Why are you awake? You have the Thornfield pitch tomorrow, I typed back. Something came up. Danny. Define something. I looked at Cora, who was studying the flea market print on my wall with that evaluating gaze, and typed. Cora showed up. The response was immediate. Danny. Excuse me. Danny. Like at your actual door. Danny. Wren. Danny. Do you need me to come over? I put the phone face down. Your best friend? Cora guessed. She has opinions. Cora smiled. Properly. With her whole chest. And there it was. The small chip in her right front tooth from a childhood bicycle accident, visible when she smiled certain ways, which was often. I had memorized it without permission. My memory had refused to let the details soften the way I'd been assured they would by basically every piece of conventional wisdom about moving on. They had not softened. They had sharpened. I resented this about myself. Danny still thinks I'm a disaster, Cora said. She thinks you were thoughtless. That's different. Not from where you're standing. Fair. She looked down at the pillow. The tattoo. That's what I came here about. Not to relitigate anything. I want to finish the piece. Properly, with everything I know now. She looked up. The shading work I would have done 2 years ago would have been solid. What I could do now would be something else entirely. Different how? She thought for a moment. Ellis had this thing he said about depth. Not literal depth, but visual depth. The illusion of dimension. He said most artists shade before they truly understand the shape they're working with, before they understand where the light is and where the shadows fall, and what the whole piece is actually trying to say. She paused. I shaded too early on a lot of things. I heard the secondary meaning clearly. I was fairly certain she intended me to. So you want to finish the tattoo? I said carefully. And this is separate from everything else. She met my eyes. I know it can't be one conversation, Wren. I know what I did. I'm not sitting here tonight expecting anything except the chance to finish work I started and abandoned, something I owe you. Her voice was steady. That is the whole of what I'm asking. I believed her. Believing her was possibly the most inconvenient thing I had felt in recent memory. The thing about Cora, the thing I had been explaining to Danny in various forms over the past 14 months, was that she was not a bad person. She had not been cruel. She had been thoughtless in a specific, significant way, had made a decision that should have been a conversation, had chosen her own fear of conflict over my right to participate in decisions about my own life. This was real. It had weight. But she had also been, in the time I'd known her, one of the most quietly remarkable people I had ever spent extended time with. She had the kind of attention that makes you feel genuinely seen because it misses very little and judges surprisingly less. She remembered things, not just her clients' anniversaries and the names of their children, which she kept in a small notebook in her studio because she wanted to know the whole person, but the small, unremarkable things about me, that I ate cereal dry out of the box when anxious, that I was quietly proud of certain pieces of work and would never say so without prompting. She held all of it with the same careful attention she gave her finest line work, and she had never once made me feel like being known was a burden. Which, as Danny had pointed out, with exasperated precision about 8 months into the separation, made the whole thing significantly harder to file away neatly. "If you say yes to the tattoo," I said, "it doesn't mean anything except that I want the piece finished." "I know. In the studio. Properly scheduled. Not here." "Of course. And you'd need to be sober." Something moved across her expression. "Wren, I would never." "I know you wouldn't," I said quickly. "I'm setting parameters so I know what I've agreed to." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. "You're agreeing to let me finish what I started," she said quietly. "That's all." I looked at the coffee table for a moment. My phone, face down, Danny undoubtedly still generating alarmed messages on the other side of it. My Tuesday evening, which had been entirely ordinary until it wasn't. "Okay," I said. "Yes." The breath she let out was small and controlled. I heard it anyway. She sobered up over the following hour in the way people do when adrenaline and significant conversation do the work that time usually handles. I made tea. We talked about things that were not the tattoo and not the breakup. She told me about a client in Portland who had come in for a simple piece and ended up staying through 3 extended sessions because he needed to talk, and she had let him. And what went on his shoulder had become something entirely different from what he'd originally asked for. She told me about a cafe in Portland that had served the same 3 breakfast items for over 30 years without a single variation, and how she had eaten there alone most Sunday mornings and found something steadying in the consistency of it. She told me about a gallery opening where every piece was made from discarded materials, and how she had stood in front of one sculpture for a very long time and then had to leave before she cried, which she did anyway in the parking lot. I told her about the Thornfield pitch I was giving tomorrow, a heritage bookshop that needed a rebrand that honored its 34 years without turning it into a museum. She listened with the focused interest she gave things she found genuinely curious, which had always been slightly unfair in its intensity. I told her about a gallery show Danny and I had attended 2 months ago, where the artist used the word liminal in 4 consecutive sentences of wall text, and how we had spent the rest of the evening writing increasingly unhinged alternative interpretations in a shared notes document. "Read me one," Cora said. "Absolutely not. Wren, I'm protecting your opinion of both of us. I don't think anything you could read me would damage that." She held out her hand in the universal gesture for, "Give me the phone." I looked at her for a moment and then opened the notes document and read Danny's 3 sentences about the liminal space between liminalities and lost my composure completely. Cora was laughing too. Head back, both hands wrapped around her mug. Nothing performed about it. There had never been anything performed about her in unguarded moments, which was the central problem. Because there is nothing more disarming on the planet than a person laughing genuinely at something you've said. It dismantles every reasonable defense without even trying. I texted Danny. "She's sobering up. She's fine. Please go to sleep." Danny. "She is not at your place right now." Danny. Wren Calloway, I put the phone down. By midnight she was visibly fading. Whatever combination of adrenaline and honesty had been keeping her upright was running out. "You should sleep," I said. "I'll get a ride." "It's almost 1. You don't need to do that." She looked at me carefully, measuring the temperature of what I meant. "I have a couch," I said. "You've slept on it before." Something shifted in her face. That was a different time. "The couch hasn't changed. You'll be fine." A pause. "Thank you." I got her a blanket and a pillow, left them on the sofa, went to my room, and lay on top of my covers and stared at the ceiling. I could hear the small sounds of her settling, the slight creak of the cushions. I thought about the tattoo, about what it had meant when she chose my ribs for it, the choosing of that place, because people put things there when they're not showing them to everyone. I thought about her saying she had shaded too early. I thought about the roots visible at the bottom of the composition and how she said they were the part she loved most. I thought about her standing outside my building in December in the cold, and then going home. I thought about an unfinished thing that had been living in my skin for 2 years, and whether I had ever genuinely believed that incomplete was its own kind of complete, or whether I had simply needed something to say. The city outside was very still. My ribs knew something my brain was still catching up to. I woke at 6:15 because I always wake at 6:15. I lay there for a moment and listened, the way you listen when you know the shape of your apartment has changed overnight. She was still here. I could tell by the quality of the silence. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. On the sofa, she was asleep on her side, one hand tucked under the pillow, the blanket pulled close. Her left forearm was visible above the edge of it. The old ghost stains of her work, a faint watercolor impression of years of sessions layered on each other. I stood in the kitchen doorway longer than was necessary, and then turned back to the kettle. I had the Thornfield pitch at 10. I had to shower. I had to eat something that wasn't anxious cereal. 2 cups in, she woke. She appeared in the kitchen doorway with the blanket still partially around her shoulders, with the specific expression of a person who has remembered everything they said the night before and is making peace with it in real time. "Morning," I said. "Morning." She looked at the kettle. "May I?" Cups are where they were. She made tea with the same methodical care she brought to every small task. She leaned against the counter and drank it in the morning light coming through the east window. I sat at the table eating cereal out of the box because I was anxious and there was no point pretending otherwise. She watched me eat cereal out of the box and said nothing about it, but something in her expression got very quiet and careful in the way it did when she noticed something she was choosing not to name. "I meant what I said about the tattoo," she said. "I know. I'll text when the studio's ready. 3 weeks, maybe 4. We can schedule it properly." A pause. "Or you could come by to see the space first. No pressure. Just if you wanted to." The last time I had been in her studio was the week before she left for Portland. I had stopped by to return a borrowed jacket. She had been finishing a session with a client. I sat in the waiting area and looked at the flash art prints and the organized equipment and the shelf of specialty inks and thought, she built this whole thing and it is beautiful, and she is about to leave it and I do not understand. I left the jacket on the reception table and went. "Maybe?" I said. She nodded as if maybe was a perfectly acceptable answer. She didn't push. She had never been a pusher. I had once thought this was gracious. I had later classified it as a mixed quality because a person who doesn't push also doesn't advocate, doesn't say, "I want to hold on to this. I'm not ready to let this drift away from me." "I should shower," I said. "I should go." She finished her tea and set the cup in the sink. "Thank you. For the couch. The couch sends its warmest regards." She smiled again. The chip in her tooth. The whole chess thing. I looked at my cereal. 3 weeks, she said. Maybe 4. Okay. She found her heels by the door, put them on in the entryway, picked up her bag, opened the door. She paused on the threshold for exactly the length of time a person pauses when deciding whether to say one more thing or let the moment close on its own. She let the moment close. The door shut behind her and the apartment went back to being its usual shape. My dimensions, my quiet. I sat with the cereal for a few more minutes. Then I went to shower and stood under the water and put my left hand over my ribs, over the outline of wildflowers and stems and roots that had lived in my skin for almost 2 years, and thought about Cora's hands, the steadiest things I had ever felt. Danny called at 8:22, which was early enough to make clear she had been awake for some time deciding what to say. "I'm fine," I answered instead of hello. I know you're fine. I want to discuss the specific variety of fine. She slept on the couch. She's reopening her studio. She wants to finish the tattoo. A pause. Say all of that again, but slower. I said it at the same pace. Wren. Danny had a particular way of saying my name that carried 3 complete sentences inside it. This version contained, I love you, I am worried about you, and what exactly are you doing? It's a tattoo, I said. She started it. It's unfinished. She started it during a relationship she then left, Danny said. She is now returning to finish the tattoo after showing up at your door at midnight having had several drinks. Do you hear that sentence from the outside? It sounds like a YouTube video. It sounds like a disaster with excellent aesthetics, Danny said, which has been your documented type since before I knew you. She said the work she'd do now would be different, I said. She said she shaded too early. A long beat. Are we still talking about the tattoo? I did not answer that. Wren. Different version. The one that meant, I see you. I love you. I cannot stop you from doing whatever you're going to do. I only want you not to get hurt again. Let me get through the pitch, I said. I'll tell you everything after. The pitch will be fine. You've been building it for 2 weeks. She paused. I just don't want you to open a door and then get... Danny. I know. She exhaled. Call me after. And eat something before you go in. Something with actual nutritional content. The cereal has already happened. That's not reassuring. A pause. I love you. Love you too. I hung up and stood in front of the mirror with my blazer half on and thought about the fact that I had a pitch in 2 hours, and somehow it felt like a thing happening in another dimension, less real than the particular quality of morning light that had come through my kitchen window and found Cora's face. This was going to be a problem. The Thornfield pitch went well. Georgia, the shop's owner, had the quality of someone who had read enough human stories that nothing you said was going to surprise her. She had strong opinions about 3 elements of the concept and no opinions about the rest, and her 3 opinions were correct. By the end of the hour, we had a direction and a timeline, and she told me she liked that the concept understood what the shop actually was. The best professional feedback I had received in months. I called Danny from the pavement outside. Went well, I said. Georgia liked it. Good. Now tell me everything about last night. I told her. The whole of it, or the whole that could be told walking down a city street. The 3 measured knocks, the heels, the whiskey and honesty, the tattoo conversation, the part about Portland, the part about December and standing outside my building in the cold and then simply going home. When I finished, Danny was quiet. She stood outside your building in December, she said. Yes. And then walked away. Yes. And then 3 months later came to your door completely sincere. Correct. Silence. That, Danny said, is the most frustrating and romantic thing I have heard in recent memory. I resent it on your behalf. Both things simultaneously, I said. In my professional opinion as your best friend, she said, you are completely cooked. I know. The tattoo thing is so completely her, though. It couldn't be a text or a direct conversation. It has to be the tattoo. The tattoo is real, I said. It's genuinely unfinished. Wren. I know it's real. I'm saying the tattoo is the shape she found to say something larger. And you know that? I did know that. What are you going to do? She asked. Let her finish the tattoo. And beyond that, I genuinely don't know. That's honest, at least. She paused. Go eat something with protein. You're impossible when you only have cereal. I ate lunch on a bench in a small park near the studio, under a tree that hadn't committed to spring yet. Bare-branched, still deciding. I sat in the uncertain air and didn't check my phone and let myself sit with the one question I hadn't let myself ask last night. Not whether Cora had changed. I had no way of knowing that. One conversation couldn't answer it reliably. The question was simpler. The one underneath all the others. The one the tattoo had always been the shape of. Did the roots mean something? Had someone who drew the roots visible and said they were the part she loved most? Had she planted something in me? Or had she simply passed through and left a mark? The tree above me had not decided yet. Neither had I. She texted 3 days later. Not about an appointment, just a photo. The studio half set up. Equipment being arranged, a new light source being installed above the client chair. The photo was slightly off-center the way all her photos were, as if the composition mattered more to her than any convention about level and straight. A mason jar of tools on the counter, flash art frames going up on the wall, and the pale light from the north window falling across the client chair at exactly the angle I remembered from the day she had pressed a stencil to my ribs for the first time. Underneath, she had written, "Coming along." I stared at the photo for a moment, then typed, "The light from that window is still perfect." She replied with one word, "Yes." And then, after a pause long enough to suggest she had considered not sending it. I thought the same thing when I saw it. I put the phone face down and went back to work, and did not pick it up again for a respectable 40 minutes, at which point I picked it up again because I have limits, and Cora Hale has always been one of the things that finds them. I walked home through the city that evening past Calloway's bar 4 blocks from my building, past my front door, past the hallway where she had stood 3 nights ago in bare feet on beige carpet holding her heels. The hallway was just a hallway again. I went upstairs and made tea, and stood in the kitchen quiet. The gallery wall looked exactly as it had Tuesday night. The flea market print in the center. Everything where I had put it. I went to bed at a sensible hour and stared at the ceiling and put my left hand over my left ribs, over the outline of wildflowers and stems and roots that had lived in my skin for almost 2 years. The roots are the part she loved most. I was in an extraordinary amount of trouble, and somewhere in the back of my chest, in a place I was not yet ready to name, I felt that I did not mind nearly as much as I should have. The texts kept coming. Not romantic, not warm in any obvious way. More like dispatches from a person who had decided communication was the responsible choice and was going to execute it with the same methodical attention she gave everything else. North window light in the morning is better than I remembered. You were correct. That one arrived on a Thursday at 7:40 while I was waiting for the kettle. I stared at it for an embarrassingly long time. 4 words. The most Cora-shaped compliment that existed. I typed back, "I usually am." She sent, "Don't push it, Calloway." And that was somehow worse than if she had said something tender. The shorthand of it. The ease of a person who knows how you prefer your name. She texted 3 weeks later. "Studio is ready. Come see it if you want. Wednesday works if you're free after 5. I showed it to Danny over video call. Danny read it, then looked at me through the screen with the expression of a woman watching a friend walk voluntarily toward something that was definitely going to hurt, who also suspected the friend had already made her peace with it. "Wednesday," I said. "Obviously," said Danny. I showed up at 5:15, close enough to punctual. Late enough that I had spent the extra 15 minutes on the pavement outside reading the sign that said Hale Studio. Opening April in clean block letters on frosted glass, having a private argument with myself about what sensible actually meant when you were afraid. I went in. The studio was small and specific in the way all of Cora's spaces had always been specific. She had opinions about everything, the placement of the light sources, the texture of the waiting area chairs, the framed anatomy prints on the wall. The client chair was the same one she had always used. Clean navy leather, positioned to catch the north window light. She came out from the back room with a smear of ink on her right hand from testing something. Her hair was knotted back the way it always was when she was working. She looked at me. I looked at the studio. We both did the other thing without saying so. I looked at the flash art frames on the wall. Some old work I recognized, and some new pieces that were extraordinary, finer and more confident than anything I remembered, with a depth of shadow work that hadn't been in her earlier pieces. Then she crossed to the flat file cabinet and pulled the second drawer. Inside, in a clear sleeve, were pages I recognized from 3 years ago. The pencil studies, the invented wildflowers, the long winding stem, and the roots at the bottom, drawn visible and deliberate. I kept them, she said, not looking at me, because I thought finishing it someday might be the kindest thing I could offer you, and because I couldn't throw away something I made for you. I stood in the quiet studio for a moment. "Schedule the appointment," I said. She looked at me then. "You're sure?" "Schedule it, Cora." She held my gaze for one beat longer than neutral, then reached for her phone. The appointment was the following Saturday at 10. Danny showed up at my door at 8:30 with coffee and the expression of a woman who intended to either help or bear witness to history. "You look nervous," she said. "A little." "Say what you're nervous about out loud." I rebuttoned my shirt because I'd done it wrong. She is going to spend 2 to 3 hours with her hands on my ribs, and I have been in love with her for 2.5 years, including the 14 months she wasn't here. Danny was quiet, then. "Have you told her that?" "No." "Are you going to?" "I have absolutely no idea," I said. "I am operating entirely on instinct, and my instincts have a complicated track record." She sighed, the long exhale of a person who loves you and can do nothing useful with it at this moment. "Go," she said. "Text me when you're done, and if you need me to collect you from the pavement outside, text me that too." The studio smelled of Cora's particular combination of specialized ink and citrus cleaning solution, and something warm underneath both of those things, cedar maybe, or just the accumulated quality of a space that a specific person has worked in long enough to leave themselves in the air of it. She was at the sterilization station when I came in, prepping her equipment with her back to the door. She heard me and didn't turn immediately, and I had a few seconds to stand in the doorway and look at her before she was aware of being looked at. 8 minutes early," she said. 8 minutes is close enough to on time." She turned with the almost smile. "Sit. I want to walk you through the plan." She did it with a printed diagram because Cora believed in the courtesy of letting a person know exactly what was about to happen to them. The shading sequence, where she would build depth first, at the base of the stems near the roots, then upward to the petals. The light source from the upper left, shadow falling rightward and downward, the way shadows fall in late afternoon. 2 to 3 hours depending on how the skin takes the ink, she said. Rib work can be unpredictable. A pause. "You've done this before?" "I did the outline here," I said. "With you." She met my eyes. "Yes, I know." We let the silence close on its own. "Ready?" she said. "Ready." There is a quality to lying back on a tattoo artist's chair that has always seemed specific to nothing else in ordinary life. The quality of voluntary surrender. You are choosing, with full information, to offer part of your body to someone else's hands and to stay still for however long the work takes. Trust encoded at the cellular level. Cora angled the chair. The north window light fell across the room in its long, soft diagonal. I lay back, and she lifted the left side of my shirt and folded it above the line of the work. And then she was quiet for a moment, looking at the existing piece the way she always looked at work before continuing it. Not as if it were hers or mine. As if it were a document in a language she spoke fluently, rereading to find exactly where she had left off. "It held well," she said softly. "The lines are clean." She snapped her gloves on, set up the ink, the tiny clinical sounds of the station, and then her left hand came to rest against the curve of my ribs, warm and steady, and the needle began. I had forgotten, in 2 years, how much of the experience was about finding a relationship with the discomfort. How much of staying still was a choice you made continuously? Breathe, she said. I am breathing. You're holding the bottom of it. Let it go fully. I let it go. She worked in silence for the first several minutes, and I gave her the quiet she needed. The way a musician goes inward at the beginning of something difficult, not because they are uncertain, but because the quality of attention required is worth more than any conversation. The needle lifted. She refilled the ink. It's going to be richer than you expect, she said. The original outline was a slightly cooler black than what I'm working with now. The contrast will create depth even before the shading is fully built. Is that a good thing? It's an unexpected good thing. A pause. Most unexpected good things are. I turned that over for a moment, lying still with the ceiling above me and her hands at my ribs. There was something almost unbearable about the position. Not the pain, the position itself. The complete physical vulnerability of it, being attended to by someone with whom the history of attending had always run in several directions at once. When you were in Portland, I said, did you ever think about the piece? A pause in the work. Yes, she said. Often? More than was probably useful. The needle came back. The reference sketches were in my portfolio bag the entire 8 months. Ellis asked me once whose piece it was. I told him it was a commission I hadn't finished. That's technically accurate. Technically, she agreed. She worked from the bottom upward, following the growth direction of the plants. I could feel the difference between the areas she was working and the existing outline, denser, more layered. Each time her hand returned to my ribs, I was aware of it in a way that had nothing to do with the needle. At one point, she asked me to adjust my position, lifting my left arm to fold behind my head, which brought her closer. Her head bent over the work at the level of my shoulder, close enough that I could feel the warmth she was giving off in the cool studio air. Don't move, she said. I'm not moving. You're holding tension in your lower ribs. It will interfere with the saturation. Consciously release it. I released it. The result was that I went more fully still, and the distance between us contracted by a fraction, and she was very close and very steady, and her hands were the same hands they had always been. Thank you, she said. You're welcome, I said, with nothing in my voice, which took more effort than anything else I had done that day. She broke at the midpoint to check the work in the mirror she angled for me. The bottom half of the piece was coming alive in a way I had not been prepared for. The roots were extraordinary, built in layers of deepening shadow that made them look genuinely anchored, as if the flowers above them existed because of what was happening underground. The shading climbed the stems in a gradient from dark at the base to lighter at the tips of the petals. I looked at it without speaking. The roots? I said finally. They're the part that matters most, she said. She was looking at the work in the mirror over my shoulder. Everything above them is consequence. I thought about her saying she had shaded too early. I thought about the reference sketches kept in a bag for 8 months. I thought about December and the cold outside my building and her going home. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes. Why December specifically? Why that night? The sound of ink preparation continued for a moment. It was close to the anniversary, she said. Of what? Of when I finished your outline. Almost exactly 3 years to the week. She came back to the chair. Her hand returned to my ribs and the needle came down. I don't know why I tracked that. I told myself I wasn't. What did you answer yourself when you asked what you'd say at the door? She was quiet. That I didn't have anything earned enough yet, she said finally. That showing up in December would have been about what I needed, not about what I owed you. The needle lifted, so I went home. I lay still. And then, 3 months later, I said. 3 months later, I had a few drinks at Callaway's, and the sketches were on the table, and I thought, the earned version is the tattoo. The least I can do is finish what I started. And everything else? I said. The needle stopped. not adjusted, stopped entirely. She lifted it, and the sudden absence of sound was loud in the quiet studio. I kept my eyes on the ceiling. I was aware of her beside me with the particular totality. You are aware of something when your whole body has been paying attention to it for 2.5 years and has run out of patience for pretending it hasn't. What? Everything else? She said. You know what everything else? I said. A long moment. The north window light lay across us both. She set the needle down on the tray with care. Not the professional set down of a break, the careful set down of a person who is about to say something that cannot be said while holding a tool. I came back here, she said, very even, very careful. I signed the studio lease and set this whole space back up and stood outside your building in December and went home because I hadn't earned the right to be honest with you yet. A pause. But I need you to know that every decision I have made in the last 4 months has had the same answer underneath it. I turned my head to look at her. Her gloved hand still rested against my skin below the piece. Warm and steady. What answer? I said. She looked at me then. That I am still in love with you, she said. That I have been in love with you the entire time. Portland, December. Callaway's. This morning. Right now. That every careful thing I have done in the last 14 months has been an attempt to become someone who deserved to say that out loud without it costing you something. The ceiling above me was very still. I'm not asking you for anything, she said. This is not the moment where I ask for something in return. I am finishing the piece regardless. But I am not able to keep sitting this close to you without you knowing what the conversation I have been trying to have is. I sat up. She sat back immediately, giving me space. And I almost laughed because she thought I was sitting up to create distance. That was not why I was sitting up. I sat up because lying down was not the position I wanted for what I was about to say. I was angry with you for a long time, I said. Not performed angry. Actually angry. You made a decision that should have been a conversation and you left before I could figure out what any of it meant. That cost me something real, and I'm not pretending it didn't. She didn't flinch. I know, she said. And I stopped. Started again. I told Danny this morning, for the first time out loud, that I have been in love with you for 2.5 years, including the 14 months you were gone, including December, including every text since you came back. I looked at her. You are not the only one who has been carrying something. The expression on her face was not what I expected. Not relief. Not triumph. Something more like a controlled thing giving way. Her hand closed briefly into a fist and then released. You loved me the whole time, she said, testing the weight of the sentence. The whole time, I said. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the last of the careful, managed distance she had been maintaining since she knocked on my door 3 weeks ago came down. Then let me finish what I started, she said. Her voice was different now, low and certain. All of it, the piece, whatever comes after. I looked at her across the small space between us. Finish the tattoo, I said. Then we talk about whatever comes after. She nodded once, reached for the needle, and I lay back down. She worked for another 40 minutes, and I stayed still, and the studio was quiet, and she did not say anything else, and neither did I, because some things are better said in the language of staying still and allowing someone to come as close as they need to in order to finish what they came to do. When she was done, she sat back and looked at the work for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "Look." I turned my head and looked at my own left side in the mirror she angled for me. I don't have adequate language for what it looked like. I work in visual language professionally. I know all the technical names for what she had done. None of that is the right language. The right language is this. It looked the way things look when they have been made by someone who understood them from the inside. The roots were anchored in shadow so deep they appeared to be genuinely under the skin, as if the flowers had not been placed on the surface but had grown up through it from something real underneath. The stems wound through each other with the patient purposefulness of things that have learned to navigate toward light. The petals curved in their impossible bracing gesture, fragile-looking and entirely capable of surviving whatever was pressing against them. It was the most personal thing anyone had ever made for me. "Cora," I said. "Don't," she said softly. "You'll ruin your mascara." I laughed. It came out wet at the edges. She cleaned the work and walked me through the revised aftercare and helped ease my shirt back down with her hands slower than they needed to be for a purely professional task. We stood in the after quiet of the studio. The light had moved since 10. Past noon, the room holding a different kind of pale. "I have a question," she said. "Okay. Can I take you to lunch?" "That's your question?" "I have other questions," she said. "Lunch feels like the right place to ask them." "You're trying to do this properly," I said. Something warm moved across her face. "I have not always done things properly. I would like to start now." "Yes," I said. "You can take me to lunch." The following weeks were not immediately simple. They were the kind of complicated that belongs to two people with real history who have both been shaped by its specific damages and are trying to build something that accounts for that rather than papers over it. There was a hard evening at my kitchen table where I said something about the Portland announcement, and she didn't deflect. She said, "I made that decision alone because I was afraid you'd have a better argument than my desire to go, and I wasn't ready to risk it. That was wrong. I chose my fear over your right to be part of the conversation." She held my gaze the whole time, no performance in it. I sat with that, then said, "Part of why it hurt as much as it did was that I had already been waiting for you to leave. I had been waiting since the beginning, and when it happened the way it happened, it confirmed everything I had been afraid to say out loud." She was very still. "What were you afraid to say?" "That I wasn't sure I was worth staying for," I said. The kitchen was quiet. "You were the most careful thing I have ever been careless about," she said, low and steady. "Not to excuse anything, just as a fact that is true." That sentence lived in me for several days. I would turn it over at odd moments. On the train, in the shower, in the small hours before sleep. It was not the end of the harder conversations, but it was an acknowledgement that the care had been real even when the carelessness had cost something, and that acknowledgement turned out to be the ground we could build on. Danny met her for coffee on a Thursday without me because Danny had questions that were better asked without the softening effect of my presence. She told me how it went in a voice message that ended. She answered every terrible question I asked without trying to reframe any of it. I told her the December thing was cowardly. She just agreed with me, Wren. She sat there and said, "You're right," and didn't try to make it sound better. A breath. I think she's the real thing. I just needed to look at her in person and check. I listened to it twice and put my hand over my ribs. The first time we showed up somewhere together, properly, as the thing we now were, it was Danny's birthday dinner. A table of 8, good wine, the warmth of people who have known each other long enough to stop performing. We arrived together. Danny looked up when we came in, and her face did several things quickly and ended on relief. She stood and hugged me first, hard and brief, and then looked at Cora and said, "I'm glad you're here." Not graciously, with the warmth of someone who had asked the hard questions and been answered honestly. Cora said, "I'm glad to be here." Something passed between them that I was not entirely a part of and did not need to be. At some point, a friend of Danny's called Rowan asked across the table, "How do you two know each other?" I said, "She's been putting her hands on my ribs for the better part of 3 years." Rowan blinked. Cora, beside me, laughed the whole chest laugh, without warning, without performance. Real laughter at the literal accuracy of the sentence. The sound of it went through the table. When Cora laughed properly, the room noticed. Under the table, her hand found mine. She laced her fingers through mine the way she had done since the first time, with the clean certainty of someone who has thought about this and is not going to do it tentatively. She didn't look at me when she did it. She was still talking across the table to someone else, but her hand held mine with a pressure that said, "I am here. I am not going anywhere. This is what I choose. In public, at a dinner table, in front of every person in this room." I looked at our hands on my knee under the table. Then I looked at her profile, the chip in her tooth, the small ink stain at the inside of her left wrist from work earlier in the week, the way she glanced sideways at me occasionally with that quiet, assessing look that had never felt like judgment and had always felt like being seen. She glanced sideways at me then, catching me looking. "Okay?" she said, low enough for just me. "Yeah," I said. She held the almost smile for a moment and then looked back to the table. I held her hand for the rest of the dinner, and the evening moved around us in its warm and unhurried way. On the walk home, the city was cool, and our steps matched without either of us adjusting. She had my jacket over her shoulders because October had made a sudden decision about temperature halfway through the evening, worn open rather than buttoned, because she had never been able to leave well-fitting things buttoned when the option to not was available, which I knew, which had always been one of the 400 specific things about her I had been carrying around for 2.5 years without a useful place to put them. We stopped at the corner where our directions diverged. Amber streetlight, the city moving at its late evening pace, indifferent to the specific weight of specific corners. She turned toward me. "I kept the sketches for 2 years," she said. "I kept them because you were the person I designed the piece for, and there was no version of finishing it that wasn't about you, even if you had never let me near your ribs again." She held my gaze. "The roots were always yours. The whole piece was always yours. I just needed to do the work to be allowed to say that out loud." I thought about all the words I had used over 2.5 years to describe the shape of what I had been carrying: complicated, history, unfinished, a feature rather than a flaw, a kind of complete. None of them had been accurate. The accurate word was simple. It had always been simple. "Come home with me," I said. Something in her face shifted into a warmth I didn't need language for. She reached for my hand the way she had under the table at dinner. Clean and certain. "Yes," she said. We walked. The October air sat at the exact temperature where you want it, cool enough to make the warmth between two people walking close feel deliberate rather than incidental. Her shoulder found mine naturally, the way bodies find the geometry of closeness when they are finally allowed to stop pretending distance is protection. At my door, I turned to her. She was already close, the distance between us a decision rather than a default, made at that corner 4 streets back, and not in question. She kissed me the way she had put the shading into the piece that morning, with the specific patience of someone who has been thinking about exactly this for long enough that there is no uncertainty in the execution, only the quality of attention that means it's worth doing slowly and doing right. Her hand came to the side of my face first, warm and steady, and then she kissed me, and it was like the needle coming down for the last time on a piece that was finally, after everything, complete. I kissed her back with all of it, the 2.5 years of it, the overnight on the sofa and the cereal in the box, and the photo of the north window light, and the reference sketches she had carried for 8 months in another city because she could not bring herself to throw away something she had made for you. When we finally came apart, she pressed her forehead to mine and let out a breath that had the quality of something held a very long time. "I should have come back sooner," she said quietly. "You came back when you could do it right," I said. She pulled back just enough to look at me. Her eyes were bright in the doorway light. "I'm going to do it right," she said. Not a promise with caveats, just a sentence standing in the room by itself, asking nothing except to be received. "I know," I said. I opened the door. She set her bag down in the entryway and shrugged my jacket off her shoulders and hung it on the hook by the door, as if she already knew which hook was for her things. Because she did. Because some knowledge lives in the body long before the mind gets around to admitting it. The gallery wall caught her eye. "That print is really good," she said. "I know," I said. She smiled, turned to me, and that was how it started. Not with drama or a speech, with a jacket on a hook and a print on a wall, and the ordinary specific warmth of a person in a room with you who intends to be there. After everything. After the outline and the abandonment, and the 14 months and December and Callaways and the 3 measured knocks on a Tuesday night. After the cereal in the box and the morning tea and the photo of the north window light and the reference sketches kept in the bottom of a bag on the other side of the country, because she could not bring herself to throw away something she had made for you. After the shading session and the roots and the confession in the quiet studio and the lunch and the hard conversations and Danny's voice message and the birthday dinner and the amber corner. After all of it, what I had was this. Her, here. The tattoo on my ribs, finished at last, the roots visible and anchored in shadow exactly the way she had always intended. And the understanding, quiet and certain and carried in the body, the way all the truest things are carried, that some things are not ruined by being unfinished for a time. Some things are only possible because of what the unfinished time asked of both of you. The work, after all, had always been about what was underneath.